although we're trying to upgrade that so far unsuccessfully, but there's a lot of conversation about it. Chuck is just an inspirational kind of person to have involved with. At that time, we had a task force with maybe 30 people. He provided us not just technical knowledge, but inspiration and enthusiasm. And just the final thing I want to say about him, he was interviewed back some time ago for this book, Greenways for America. He's kind of taken over the role of the Greenways guru that's around, but this is what his response to, why do you do this work, Chuck? My personal point of view, he said, is that we're at a critical stage in the world. We've reached the point where we need to think about what kind of environmental future we're going to have. I believe we can live in harmony with our environment. We don't have to go out there and pave every square inch, but we need a new ethic for living in our world. That's why I do what I do. And I suspect Chuck would say that's still why he does what he does.
Yeah.
Chuck?
Thank you, Gordon. And that was said 30 years ago. So, no, I'm really happy to be here. I'm familiar with your organization, and I've done work in Cincinnati as well as Louisville and different communities up and down the Ohio River. So what I wanted to do, you posed 4 questions for me, and I want to answer them, but I'd like to kind of take you through a process of thinking about governance of a multi-state trail or recreation pursuit. As I said before, many of you joined the call, I may be one of the few idiots on the planet who's actually studied organizational structures of greenways and trails and long distance sort of corridors like this. I've spent about 36 years working in that space. I've helped to set up organizations from scratch. I've been the chair of American Trails and the East Coast Greenway Alliance. So I've run these sort of organizations. And I've sort of been a consultant to organizations who felt like they wanted to do a check or a tune-up and understand if they were on the right track. I remember working in Cincinnati with the Mill Creek organization, and I jokingly referred to them as a junkyard dog, and they loved that definition of themselves. And they said, we are, and we don't want to release the bite on the ankle quite yet. So, advocacy organizations are really great. And it sort of goes back to the Margaret Mead quote that, it's just a few people in the world who really move the needle and move it effectively. And so I really admire what you all have done for, over a decade and a half. I think you've moved the needle in the right direction.
I'm still on that board.
Oh, good. Fantastic. That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
I was curious, you've been going along as this sort of advocacy organization, but I see in your mission statement that you're interested in having this corridor recognized at a different level. Maybe someone can just answer the question, is it your goal that you want to be federally recognized? Is that important to you?
Dave? Dave Wicks, you are on mute.
You're mute, Dave.
Dave,
yes, we believe that it would bring some additional attention,
okay.
But we also realize that it might take a period of time, and maybe there's a whole state level, building towards that process.
There is,
so,
yeah. So it's a complicated process, yeah. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so let me walk you through a couple of things here then. All right. So over the years of working in this space and doing a lot of research, I have simplified the organizational framework for greenways and long distance corridors and trails. And what I basically have said in this research is there's 4 different types of organizational frameworks that are the most dominant 4 types of governance that goes on with these organizations in the United States. The first is that they're run completely by public agencies. And really the public agencies make up the governance, and they carry out almost all the duties and responsibilities associated with these types of organizations. The second group is what I call strong side public plus private. Strong side public plus private, which means that a lot of the work is being done in the public realm, but they partner with the private realm for certain activities, such as, say, programming, or they have a friends group, or they might do cleanup and operations, things like that. The third group is strong side private plus public, in which the private sector takes a lead role, and then they go back and they partner with the public sector. And so the roles are essentially reversed, where a lot of the work is being undertaken by the private sector, but they partner with the public sector to carry off certain events, programs, functions, whatever. And the fourth group is completely a privately run group. And those are pretty rare, but they do exist. So public, strong side public plus private, strong side private plus public, and private. Those are the four major groups. I've done this because it really helps. If you start with that as a foundation, now you can have an intelligent conversation about who you are and where you think you might want to go as an organization. Now, when I looked at the information that was supplied to you by the National Park Service, I basically did a dissection of that to give you a sense of what those organizational models are from a governance point of view. So this is a real, just quick and dirty, but FMRVRT is a strong side public plus private, in my opinion. The iron ore heritage is a strong side public plus private. And the Betsy Valley Trail is the same. So the reason I say that is because they're largely, they really have a very, very strong lean to be publicly run trails and greenways. But they do involve some private sector help and support. So it's not real strong, but it's there. The other three trails that were in that list that were provided, the Huron Sunrise Trail, the Little Traverse Wheelway, and the North Central State, are really what I would call very, very strong leans to publicly run. They have very little private sector engagement. And I'm not being critical, I'm just being factual. So I'm trying to get you into categories. So other types of models that I think that you should explore would be the Carolina Thread Trail, which is a 15-county multi-state greenway organization located in the Charlotte metro region. That is what I refer to as a strong side private plus public. The East Coast Greenway Alliance is a really good model as well. That's multi-state, it's 15 states, 450 cities, 3,000 miles. That is a strong side private plus public. A project that I recently worked on out in Arkansas is the Razorback Greenway, 36 miles, doesn't really have a resource that it follows, but it is a strong side public plus private. The Katy Trail in Missouri is another strong side public plus private, and it goes along the Missouri River and does a lot of the things that you have listed in your organizational framework, trail towns and things like that. That's really run by the state of Missouri. The Elroy Sparta Trail is another one up in Wisconsin that's strong side public plus private. And then there's two privates, the Mary Carter Greenway in Denver and the Ann Springs Close Greenway in Fort Mill, South Carolina. They are completely under private management, but they are public facilities. The Ann Springs Close Greenway charges a fee. The only reason I'm bringing all this up is because I want to balance your discussion. I want you to understand that there is a big scale, a big range of what happens when you get into this discussion of governance. And I don't want you to just be locked in to a model that is only about public. And the reason I say this is because as I look at your organization and I realize you're ad hoc and you're volunteer, your lean throughout your existence has been, in my opinion, I would categorize you as a strong side private plus public. That's where I would put you today. I'm not saying you have to stay there, but that's where I would put you today. And I think it helps if you knew how you were classified today in order to understand how you might want to move to the future. Now, in my opinion, the best model, the best parallel model in the United States that is so similar to you that you might want to study is called the Susquehanna Greenway. This is a strong side private plus public model that started out very much like you. It was an advocacy organization full of a bunch of volunteers. And about, let's see, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, 2005, 2006, I was called in to write an action plan for them and to basically transform them from being that junkyard dog to more of a, what they wanted to be was more of a formalized organization. So we went through a 501c3 process. We formed up a formal board of directors. We hired staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're a 530-mile river-based organization with river towns and trails, a blueway. They have partnerships with local governments, regional governments, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the federal government. So, but they are largely a private sector organization under a 501c3. Now, they too would love to have a federal designation. And I will just say that having pursued federal designations with different groups, it has become increasingly difficult to get these federal designations. The federal government does not necessarily want to increase its real estate. In fact, you know, without trying to get too much into politics, there have been several administrations and several efforts by Congress to actually reduce the federal estate. So it's a tug of war in that manner. And you can get yourself caught up in that tug of war and waste a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to pursue something that in the long run may not benefit you any more as an organization than if you pursued a different attack. So I just want to offer that as a perspective. So I view you right now as this sort of strong side private plus public. You go through 3 states who, interestingly, in my humble opinion, are not aligned. Not in terms of politics, but I'm just saying one is a commonwealth and 2 others. I just think that governance-wise, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky are very different in the way they've historically operated. So the reason I bring this up is it might be very challenging for you to even have a multi-state compact, a multi-state agreement. I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't pursue that and that you shouldn't pursue it. But again, you know, you could put a lot of time and energy into that and not be much further ahead. You're 250 miles in length, you're roughly 45 river towns, and you have a lot of you know, stuff going for you. And so what I like to try to do with organizations is I like to point them in the direction of their strength rather than point them in the direction of their weaknesses, because both can be draining. And I think you want to get to a point where you have some success. So let me stop there and pause and see if anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to discuss at this point in the process. If not, I can continue.
I think you actively and accurately described where we are.
Okay.
And so I appreciate it. And anybody else have any other questions?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's dead on. That's exactly what we are. And the Susquehanna Greenway people, by the way, they had 2 or 3 on our call the other day. So we already have a relationship in a very modest extent. And I've been back and forth by email with those folks. They seem wonderful.
Great. Perfect. Okay. So what happens with long distance projects like this is they really are a collection of local experiences. And I was very impressed by your videos that you have loaded to your website and your testimonials. And what a organization like yours becomes is you are the champion of the vision. You're essentially the keeper of the flame. You're the champion of the vision. And designation, you know, may or may not, federal designation may or may not help you more than what you're already doing today. Because when I look at your videos and I study your website as an introduction to your organization, what I see is that you're trying to essentially build on this fabulous resource of the Ohio River and its surrounds and its communities, and you're trying to champion what you all share in common. What is your unifying element? And of course, the river is your unifying element, but it's more than just the river, because it's the experiences of place along the river that are captivating and that people cherish and that people champion. And so nobody really, in essence, nobody really owns that per se, but you all share it. And so as this champion of the vision, as the keeper of the flame, then you want to basically say, well, what is our mission? What are we trying to do? And I think what you're trying to do largely evolves around marketing and programming, promoting, and trying to get people vested in the resource. You know, you're not necessarily capable, or do you really want to take on all the detailed tasks that would go on within the 45 river towns or the 250 miles of the resource? But you want to be a champion, you want to be an advocate, you want to be a group that represents the whole as well as the sum of the parts. And I think to do that, you largely would stay in this sort of visionary marketing, programming, advocacy role, rather than being the group that's necessarily going to take on design development, operations, those kinds of things. I think you can supplement that. You can be a champion for those things. You might even want to be a convener of discussions along the entire 250-mile scope. But I don't know that as an organization, you really want to take that on. Now, this is what I think the East Coast Greenway Alliance has done so brilliantly. The East Coast Greenway Alliance doesn't own a foot of the 3,000-mile trail. But what it's done is it's sort of set the carrot out to everybody to chase. And so they have 450 cities along the 3,000-mile route that are chasing this carrot, including some of the largest cities in America, New York and Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia and Miami, Florida, et cetera. And they say, well, if you want to be part of the East Coast Greenway, we have a set of design standards. We have an operating philosophy. We have a standard of care, a duty of care that we want you to sign on to in order to be accepted, into the East Coast Greenway Alliance. It's kind of interesting how you're an organization that has no power, and all of a sudden you're exerting power over these really large municipalities and cities along the route. But everybody, falls in place, because they want to be part of this alliance. They want to be part of this solution of the East Coast Greenway. So they set out these unified design standards, and they set out this duty of care and level of expectation as to the operation of the facility. And they get you, the local government, to sign a piece of paper that says, yeah, and you'll do all this. So it's really a kind of a fascinating way of conducting business. And I think that your organization, if you have not already assumed that role, you could assume that role, which is more kind of along the lines of what the Susquehanna Greenway is trying to do as well, and what the action plan set out for them. That action plan defined for a Susquehanna Greenway, defined the Rivertown concept. It defined a Blueway trail. It defined land-based trails. It defined issues of conservation and operations and management. And then it's been a leader going out into the communities along this 530-mile stretch and trying to make sure that those local governments that want to be part of this Greenway basically adhere to this set of standards. Now, what's really nice about them, that they're in a single state, in a commonwealth, is that they have partnered with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Environmental Protection, and all these different agencies within the state. And they partnered with the federal government, from the National Park Service Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program to other federal agencies like FEMA and Army Corps of Engineers. And everybody's sort of in lockstep. but it's sort of, you know, no power is all power. There's nothing about the Susquehanna Greenway that forces anybody to do anything. They all voluntarily, you know, come along. They all voluntarily support it. I have actually gone to Washington, D.C. with that group as they lobbied on behalf of more federal funds for their region. So they do take on an active role of trying to find money that can not just support the endeavors of the Susquehanna Greenway, but maybe even to a larger extent the funding needs of their community at large, in areas of job creation, employment, you know, cleaning up the river, you know, whatever they could do that they felt supported the vision and the mission of the Susquehanna Greenway. You know, they've done it in a unified way. So so hopefully this addresses sort of like the first question or so. You asked a couple of questions about working with the National Park Service. Well, certainly the Rivers and Trails conservation program is a great program. It's been around for decades, and a lot of accomplishment. And they certainly are folks that I've worked with through the years. They're value added to the process. I think one thing that some organizations get lost in with that program is they think that somehow that group is going to be a key or an access way to some sort of federal designation, which I've actually found, and I think that they would also say, is not really the purpose of why they're there. I mean, they're not really, they're there to provide technical assistance to communities across America to, you know, leverage and help form organizations and protect resources and empower local groups. But the work doesn't necessarily lead to getting any sort of federal designation necessarily. I mean, it could, but not always. But I think that I don't really know that you need that federal designation to be successful. And so you asked a question about how do you go from basically where you are today to where you might want to be. And I think it sort of begins by, you know, looking at a plan of action. And that plan, you might obtain the documents that were developed for the Susquehanna Greenway to get a sense of what they went through. Those would be certainly good models to look at as a single stop on how they went from being the loosely held organization to a more formal organization. They did this back in 2005, 2006. The other thing that could be helpful to you is gathering resolutions of support in all 3 states from whoever would like to sign on, whether that's the states themselves, the state governments, or the river towns or the counties. I think the more of those kinds of resolutions of support that you get for what you're trying to do, that you have it formally recorded, I think that's always a good move, because you can use that to leverage all kinds of different things, different partnerships, funding strategies, you know, more support for your organization. So I always think that's a good thing to do. Now, whether you want to formalize your organizational structure is a good question. You know, it's hard to answer, for me to give you an answer whether to do that or not. I have set these up. I do think that they are helpful. It was certainly helpful in the case of the Susquehanna Greenway. When you go through that process, however, you create this animal that requires, that needs to be fed. So, you know, that's one of the drawbacks. The plus side is that it generally is going to lead to more formal recognition of you as an organization, your ability to hire staff, your ability to carry out your mission and objectives in a more programmatic way. So you go from being all volunteer, which has its benefits, you know, to being something more formalized. I've helped several organizations across the United States do this because they felt that as they were maturing as an organization of volunteers, that this was the next logical step. And so they felt like they really needed to do it. It's not necessarily easy, and it doesn't necessarily solve every problem, but you know, in the evolution of organizations, it probably becomes time to do it. You've asked about funding. Well, funding comes from a lot of different quarters, and we get this question a lot in America about funding. I've always believed that funding, it comes from a commitment to a great idea more than it comes from a pursuit of a particular funding source. So I do think you have a great idea. I do think you can be funded from many different types of funding, both public and private sector. And I do think it's going to be cobbling together funding. Is there a single source? No. It's going to be multiple sources. And I think part of your plan of action is to identify as many of the funding sources as possible that you would cobble together to accomplish what you need to do. I think you're already doing a really, really good job of promoting your organization, promoting the river. I think your website is really fantastic. And I think it's a really, really good first step. And I think you're already doing a really wonderful job of sharing the amount of programming, the amount of events that are available for people to enjoy the resource, whether that be land-based or water-based types of events. So I really applaud you for the work you're doing there. Now, I think that I've sort of run through all your questions, hopefully. But I'd be happy to, and I know that we've covered 30 minutes, and I'm happy to stay on with you for another 10 to 15. And if you want to ask any specific questions of me.
Hey, Charlie, this is Francis Manone I'm on the steering committee with this crowd. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me all right?
I can, Francis.
So just for the planet, so just so that it just full circle for everyone, the Great Miami River Way did a planning assistance to states grants through the Army Corps of Engineers, and they studied 3 corridor districts or similar projects, and the Susquehanna people were one of those 3. So just in case all kinds of best practices comes back. But let me ask you, Charlie, in terms of a funding model, I don't recall from that planning assistance to states grant whether or not, or that study, whether or not the Susquehanna group had a paid membership model for the communities that they served.
They've tried that, and it hasn't. It's going to be, this is just my opinion, I think it's going to be really hard to do a paid membership model with local governments. I think it's just become increasingly difficult. They tried. They have not been very successful at getting participation in the entire time they've been around from all of their local governments. And I think they've really relied mostly on grants. They have been funded by their state agencies to some degree. I think they've pursued all different types of funding assistance. This is part of one of the frustrations of formalizing and becoming more of a 501c3 is that you do have to feed the beast, and it is very, very challenging to feed the beast. In the United States, unfortunately, we're really great at raising capital funds to build things, but we're not good at maintaining things, and we don't like to fund organizations for whatever reason. It's a real frustration in the nonprofit world. And with what's going on right now with COVID-19, it's become really, really a difficult thing. So, Francis, you're bringing up really good points, and certainly a challenge of going this route, and it's been a challenge for the Susquehanna Greenway.
So by membership, I don't mean like individual. I want to make sure you understand my question. This communities aren't members, right? Like those along the.
Oh, okay.
Do they buy in as investors, stakeholders? Are they part of the funding source for Susquehanna?
The communities?
Yes.
Well, they are, but many of them lack the resources to be able to really participate in any sort of robust funding strategy.
Okay.
So the Susquehanna Greenway relies mostly on grants and things like that, and they actually help to bring funding to these communities. They certainly have tried to go, we actually introduced a funding model that would involve all 22 counties along the corridor as contributing some funds to support the operation of the Susquehanna Greenway. And that's what I was talking about, and they just didn't have a lot of success with that.
And Charlie, this is Richard with Orsenko. How you doing?
Good, good.
When we talk about membership, one of the thoughts I had was almost seed money, a nominal amount, not necessarily trying to fund the organization. Like my organization, I would feel comfortable with a $250 annual membership or something like that, $500 and just more nominal, but just giving us some working, just a little bit of working money. Have you seen organizations do that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm working on one right now in the Research Triangle area. I've got 14 counties. It's a regional organization. We're not seeking funding from the public sector, but we are seeking funding from our private sector. And we're trying to raise about $500,000. And basically, we already have our first private sector donor who's put up $100,000. It'll be essentially $33,000 over 3 years. And we're in the process of seeking the other 4. And we're pretty confident we'll get them. We have 14 counties that are all signed on, essentially, conceptually, which gives us a great gravitas in terms of going into the private sector, talking about a regional trails organization, and saying we really need private sector funding to support the operations of the regional entity. And we're getting a good reception, even during this very, very difficult time. We're getting a good reception to that concept of funding. But you can break it down further. I mean, you can create different types of membership. But I think that if you're able to focus on a few, it's just a little easier to execute it than to open it really broadly. But you can set up your membership organizational structure at any level. I think the larger gifts, where you're a little bit more intentional, are probably easier to focus on and offer a greater opportunity to secure the funding.
And then one other question, you mentioned I forget the exact term, largely private but public partnership, but you mentioned a 501c3, which is a public vehicle. Are there advantages for a group of interested folks here to maintain control and not give it up to the public, but still create the 501(c)(3) organization?
Oh yeah, the 501c3 is in the private realm, and you're under IRS. You form yourself under IRS and state rules. So you'll have to figure out which state you'd want to locate the 501c3 in. And the easiest way to do that would just be to look at how each state charters 501c3s. I just recently created one of these in the state of Tennessee. And it wasn't real challenging, the state of Tennessee, to gin one of these up. So, and then we basically filed with the IRS, and it takes a little bit of time to get all the paperwork set up. And once you're that, you're really a privately constituted organization outside the realm of the public sector. But in the case of the organization I just set up, which is called Mid-South Greenprint, Inc., they are going to go back and partner with Shelby County, the city of Memphis, and the counties that are located in Mississippi and Arkansas. So they're a multi-state organization, but they're privately constructed, and so they're able to go into the private realm to do fundraising, and they have the advantage of raising funds privately, and the donors have the advantage of taking the tax write-offs and such by supporting this 501c3 that's a nonprofit organization. So that's what I'm recommending you might want to consider.
Hey, Chuck.
And we have an existing, ORRT has we started in a broadly educational 501c3 organization, a foundation. So that's where I get a little confused between private and public. I mean, it's almost, we're not state, we're not federal. We're a 501c9, and then the organization we support is a 501c3, but it's quasi public. But I guess what we're thinking about is possibly having ORRT, have this be led by this group, but use the vehicle of ORRT's foundation to already have an established 501c3. So I'm just trying to think through that.
Yep, Brewster, I'll get to you just a second, but we're basically doing the same thing right now in incubating our regional organization in the Triangle region, we are going through an existing 501c3 who has allowed us to incubate under their umbrella for a short period of time until we spin out and form up our own independent 501c3. Or Senko might be able to offer that same opportunity to this group, where you could incubate for a period of time under our Senko's 501c3, the foundation, and then and there's certain advantages to doing that. Number one, fundraising, and then over a period of time, your organization, the Ohio River Recreation Trail, whatever you want to call yourself, could spin out as its own independent 501c3. So that's another strategy to consider. Brewster, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was, first of all, thanks. This is very helpful. Can you share with us what messages and essentially arguments you all presented to funders with entities that are private, strong private, with the partnership with public, as I think we are? What messages about the value and benefits of that organization resonated most with donors, whether they're individual foundations or even public sources? What message about the work and the mission really resonates, and maybe especially now?
Oh yeah, I was going to go back to Gordon's introduction.
Yeah, right.
I think there's such a high level of awareness right now where we're without being overly dramatic, we're sort of battling three separate things simultaneously, if you will. We're battling a pandemic that is really got everyone befuddled because we don't really know how to fight it effectively. So we're essentially using a strategy that's over 100 years old, a lockdown strategy, buying us time until hopefully we have a vaccine and so on and so forth. And, much to my prediction, I knew America would give it 30 days and then all hell would break loose. And that's essentially what you have happen. The second thing that we're battling are the long-term consequences of global climate change and the impacts that it's really having on communities, especially shoreline communities. Shoreline communities are the ones getting hammered the hardest all around the globe from the impacts of global climate change, and the organizations and institutions that operate within shoreline communities. They're having to spend increasingly huge amounts of money to battle the amount of increased water, the water vapor and water that's circulating the planet. And then the third thing, unfortunately, that we're battling in this country is systemic racism and the inequality, the lack of inequality, that we've had as part of our country ever since its founding. So, when you look at that and you look at where the public sector is and the private sector is, the response that I'm hearing from the private sector and the ability to go out and talk to businesses and corporations is that they are committed to resolving all three. They're very committed to resolving all three. And traditionally, we've looked to our public sector to try to address this. We now see that that's very, very complicated. We're a very polarized, divided country. It's very difficult to push unified sort of legislation on these three fronts. So the private sector organizations that I've talked to in St. Louis and Memphis and the Triangle region, which are my most recent conversations, are all very interested in supporting organizations that might be dealing with 1, 2, or 3 of these kinds of agenda items. Because they look at it as an effective use of their dollars. Some of these private organizations and businesses actually have those things as mission statements or as part of their mission statements. They respect diversity, equity, and inclusion. They respect being responsible for how they're going to address issues of global climate change. They want healthy and healthy and fit employees or healthy and fit customers. So whether I'm talking with the Walton Family Foundation in Northwest Arkansas as we were doing the Razorback Greenway, or I'm talking with the Research Triangle Foundation in the Research Triangle Park, which is interested in growing the impact of the Research Triangle Park. These businesses, these organizations are very responsive to the fact that we have an outlet where their funds can be directed and they get more efficient return on their investment. This return on investment is a different calculus than maybe a traditional return on investment. So I think that there's an opportunity out there to do fundraising in that realm.
Thank you. Excellent.
Is there anything else? Any other comments or questions?
Hey, David, could you unmute Jerry? I think you had a question or a comment.
They have to unmute themselves, I think.
Oh, okay.
Jerry, is that true?
David, as the organizer, you should be able to unmute him as well.
Okay, I think you unmuted, Jerry.
There you go. Now, am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you, Jerry.
Ah, there we are. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Chuck, I was wondering, you're talking about federal designation. What's the difference in your perspective about federal designation versus federal recognition?
That's a good point. Federal recognition probably would be the easier road. Federal designation of a multi-state, landscape corridor of this type is probably going to result in congressional action. You're going to need congressional sponsors. You'd need to introduce federal legislation that would go through federal review. States not aligned with your three would have to agree that this portion of the Ohio River would, need a federal designation. There's just a lot of stuff that goes into all of that. Federal recognition could be a little different. And you would have to be, what is it that you're trying to achieve with the recognition that you don't already have in hand? That might be the question that would be asked. And so both of them are going to be a process. I think in either case, you would have to have, congressional sponsors. And quite honestly, you'd want to have congressional sponsors in all three states. And you're going to need those sponsors in both the House and the Senate. So I think either one's going to be a process. Now, I think your National Park Service staff can help you navigate that. They can basically tell you what the differences are in the two approaches and what your strategy might be for going through with that. Having been a part of these conversations in other parts of the country, I know that it's quite challenging to do that.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hey, I have a question, Charles. Back to the Susquehanna Greenway Group. You said their primary funding program source were grants. What is their unique selling proposition that makes them successful and without competing with their constituents, if you will, if everybody's going after the same pie?
Right. I think that they are sort of formed along the same lines where they're trying to represent the river as a whole, but they're also trying to represent the agendas of the river towns along the corridor. They're focused on clean water. They're focused on access to the resource. They're focused on making sure that there's an experience that's available, not just for Pennsylvanians, but for people from all over the world. So they're really focused on tourism, the experience economy, things like that. So I think what they try to do is they're sensitive to being competitors with their counties and their member organizations, but they also feel like if they come together as a unified force, that they're likely to fish in bigger waters, because they're seemingly a larger organization. Even if the benefit comes to only one of their river towns, like Williamsport or whatever, if they represent themselves as a unified unit, 500 miles long and 22 counties and X number of river towns, they feel like they carry more weight in their applications.
Great.
They also maintain very, very good working relationships with the Commonwealth, the governor, the legislature, and all of the various different departments. Pennsylvania is a very fractured political place. I mean, there's tons and tons of local jurisdictions. So anytime you can pull people together and you can have people unified, it speaks better to their cause. So I think that's what they've tried to do.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, you've been listening to this for a while. I wanted to see what your thoughts are, because here you've developed the Ohio River Plan 30 years ago. You've been involved in stuff here in Kentucky, been involved in Orsenco. What's your thoughts for us,
Well, I agree with Chuck.
Thank you, Gordon.
Well, what I did that for this Ohio River initiative to be successful, it needs a strong private lead. You know, we're never going to get a degree of cooperation between Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, and all those counties and all those cities that will ever get anything done. You know, a lot of conversations maybe, but so to me, it needs a really highly motivated, strong, private 501(c) leadership that can work with cities like Louisville and Cincinnati and Maysville, and you know, the cities that really want to do something that can connect them to that whole, so that when you're going out on the river, up and down the river, there's a sense of identity of this river trail, river concept that is visible and you know, has a presence. And I think a private lead organization can do that much more effectively in these circumstances. So that's sort of what I think. The other thing I think, I look at all these, you guys on your TV screens, we are not a very diverse group. I see too many people that are old white guys, you know, and I think for this to be successful, we need to engage young people meaningfully. And, you know, I don't have the solution to that. I spent last year managing a local nonprofit that has a very diverse and younger staff for the most part. And it really gave me a lot of insight into sort of their view and perspective on things. And I think to engage the public in general, we need to look at those demographics. And I also would just reinforce what Chuck said about the three issues that we're facing. We're not just going to go out and do a Greenways trail. We're going to be, why are we doing it? We're going to do it in a manner that recognizes there are these other issues that have to be addressed. And for the Ohio, this would be my final thought. All the cities on the Ohio are dealing with floodplain issues at a serious level based on standards that are at least 50 years old. Give me a break, you know. So there's something about that I think can relate to the work that's being done here in terms of public education, you know, asking questions and engaging frankly, getting core resources. I mean, those guys got lots of money and they don't always spend it efficiently. So let's, you know, grab a hold of some of it and use it for good. That's what I have to say.
Is that something you can help us do, Gordon?
Well, as Chuck will say, you know, if you've dealt with them, you kind of, you know how they operate. It is quite an effort to get, and you know, it's a longer term process. But in terms of floodplains and flooding on the Ohio River, it is going to be an issue that a lot of the Corps staff in the Corps offices have an interest in and care about. So you have an angle for the conversations.
Thank you.
Well, I think I've taken up your entire hour.
Having Corps offices as partners, you know, that would be, you know, these resolutions of support, you know, that would be a start. You know, find out who in those Corps offices cares and get them on your team.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Thank you very much, Chuck. You've given us a lot of thought for continued discussion. You've given us some great examples to really look at. And as we get our act together, hopefully we can re-engage with you and both of you to sort of continuing to develop, because I think you're right. We are a passionate group of people. Gordon, you are 100% right. We tend to be older, minus our Colorado friend here. And we tend to be overly enthusiastic, which I think is a good thing. We're optimistic. We see a good future. You know, we see some really engaging river towns who want to have some answers, and our difficulty is we don't have them. You know, they have some very deep-seated problems that I'm not sure if a recreational piece can really transform. And we don't want to oversell, you know, so it's really quality over quantity. And thank you for your comments. And you're more than welcome to stay on and listen to a little bit of our business, and we'll see how much the rest of our little crew here has time for that. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
One other final thing, Chuck mentions the Susquehanna Action Plan. I think there needs to be a plan. So doing a plan.
I 100% agree that there needs to be a plan, and Russ Clark is on here with the National Park Service, and our dream is to have a plan. At least, you know, we have another year with him, well, 9 months or so, and so that's our job, is to really pull together these ideas and to solidify our relationships with all of the towns. Brewster, any final comments before Chuck leaves?
Just very helpful. Thank you so much. Looking forward to continuing to work with you guys in some capacity.
Fantastic. Well, I unfortunately have to jump to another call, but I've enjoyed being a part of this. I'm sorry, there may have been another question.
Chuck, yeah, very quickly, with the Susquehanna Greenway Group, was the Susquehanna River Basin Commission involved in that at all?
They were. It was led by CEDACOG, but the Susquehanna River Basin Commission was definitely one of the partners in the process.
Great, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I've enjoyed being with you today, and happy to continue to be whatever value added I can be. And you know, good luck. It's a great project, and I think you all should be proud of all the great work you've already done.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.